I don't have any tattoos. There are a lot of things I want to say to the world, and I admittedly walk around in a pretty good-sized canvas. But I prefer the changeable billboard of ideas known as T-shirts. And I have lately taken to wearing T-shirts inspired by Neil deGrasse Tyson, or at least someone that operates his website. T-shirts designed to fly in the face of the irrational thinking so prevalent in our world. One of mine says, "Science doesn't care what you believe." Another one says, "Science is not a liberal conspiracy." But my favorite one, the one that I wash every time I wear it so I can wear it again quickly, says, "Demand evidence and think critically." In all of these sentiments, those of us who promote an evidence-based faith can meet scientists on the field of strict rational thought. Both the universe of science and the universe of progressive faith want to do away with magical thinking. We want people to stop using sloppy thinking and reason-defying superstition. But I have to admit that I have a holdout. I have a caveat, and that's when you turn to the topic of ethics. You would never morally fault a bear for getting into trash cans, because bears are mammalian eating machines. And for a bear, there's no difference between a dumpster or a deer. It's lunch. And so we don't waste any time talking about good bears and bad bears. Bears are just bears. I may be more righteous in my judgment of squirrels. Why just take 2 or 3 bites out of a tomato and then leave it and then go bite another tomato? Yeah, but really they're just being squirrels. Evil, malevolent, bushy-tailed rodents, but just squirrels. But when it comes to people, talking about human nature is much more complex. Our instincts and our cultural rules that are necessary to make living in cities possible, our instincts and our cultural rules are oftentimes in conflict. A 1-year-old child is a natural human being. A 1-year-old is still acting on instinct, and their instinct is to poop in their pants, to take whatever they want. They never pay for anything, they don't go to work, and they have no regard for the comfort of those around them. They are loud, inconsiderate, and selfish. And thankfully, it's a part of human nature to adore and love these tiny creatures. Otherwise, we would ask Monsanto to help us find a way to exterminate them, because they are irresponsible and noisy and troublemaking. But in a very real way, then, we are all born to be sociopaths. We're all born to be psychopaths. But if you get some decent parenting, you can be taught not to be a sociopath or a psychopath. We learn to share. People will, if you have an only child, you'll get a pet to teach them to love and to share and to care about the feelings of another animal. We have to be taught to be aware that it's not just us that has feelings, everybody else has feelings. We have to be able to anticipate the needs of another person, to have sympathy and hopefully empathy. We try to make sure that those who are in our immediate tribe are healthy, well-fed, and as happy as possible. But those aren't natural instincts. Those are learned behaviors. Sociologically, humans have more in common with dogs than any other animal, more even than most primates. Dogs, like humans, tend to live in a social order. left to their own devices, if they're not pets, they tend to live in a pack. They will care for their young. Within the pack, they've worked out an authority pecking order, usually worked out pretty violently. But you never in nature find a community of 100,000 dogs or 1 million dogs, certainly not 9 million dogs. They're pack animals, and they will compete within the pack for mates and for authority, but then the packs compete with one another for territory and resources. So they never get huge. They have a social structure, but they do not have a civilization. Our instincts would never produce a civilization. We have to be able to be deliberative. We have to have ethics. We have to have a deeper concern for other people who are not necessarily in our immediate pack in order to create a civilization. Now, Ayn Rand, the much loved by some and much hated by other, author of such novels as Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead, builds a philosophical defense for selfishness as being the only intelligent and honest way to live. And it's no surprise that she was a favorite author of a number of prominent political leaders, several of whom actually give copies of Ayn Rand's books out to their staff and make it mandatory reading, that they need to understand that the mechanics of politics is to exploit people in a way that doesn't let them know they're being exploited. She was sort of a modern era Machiavelli, and I don't want to go too deep in the woods, but let me just not assume that you know Machiavelli, an Italian writer of the 15th century who wrote The Prince, which was a detailed description of how rulers can exploit the population without them knowing that they're being exploited, so that you can get them to do your bidding. And in his day, princes and rulers thoroughly denounced Machiavelli for his anti-religious, anti-compassion, anti-loving kind of suggestions. However, historians would typically tell you that they all followed his book to the letter. I mean, they would publicly deny it, but they understood that he had a reasoned approach to a logical, self-serving philosophy. Rand and Machiavelli and many right-wing politicians are able to get around the social norms that our parents taught us of ethics and empathy to do what is in their best interests, or sometimes in the best interests of their pack, their party, their nuclear tribe, but they can be totally ruthless to everyone else and not feel a twinge of conscience about it. They do it without misgivings, because if we're completely honest, if I follow my shirt, demand evidence and think critically, being self-serving is logical. If you're just looking at facts, cold, hard, honest facts, self-service has a functioning and defensible logic to it. Young people are sometimes drawn to anarchical or libertarian political ideologies because they really do want to be free of any burden of empathy towards those who are not in their immediate pack. A world without government, without taxes or laws. It sounds idyllic to those who are not mature enough to have ever thought their way through it. I don't want to sound like Hillary Clinton sounded this week, saying that Bernie supporters are largely people living in their parents' basement. I can tell you I was mildly offended by that. But no one would actually want to actually live in a world governed by a libertarian government. I mean, there are things about it that sound appealing to an adolescent mind, but you wouldn't want to live there. You wouldn't want to have to deal with what the implications would be. Political pundits have lately taken to calling Donald Trump a sociopath. And again, I don't want to go too far into the weeds in technicality, especially since there's a psychology professor wandering around back there in the narthex. But the media tends to confuse the terms sociopath, psychopath, and psychotic, and they don't mean the same things. Both sociopaths and psychopaths have what we call an antisocial personality disorder. They're not crazy. They just don't have much ability to feel empathy. That they don't anticipate another person's feelings. You see that as well in certain levels of autism. Sometimes that's due to an actual brain injury, or it's a matter of the way their brains were wired from birth. But in most cases of sociopaths and psychopaths, it has to do with their environmental conditioning, their circumstances, their lack of loving parenting or good parenting. This year's political season is revealing that our whole society is exhibiting some of the diagnostic criteria of sociopathology or psychopathology. When someone, for example, has health insurance and they militantly do not want any changes in our healthcare delivery system because they have adequate health insurance, and they don't care that millions of other people don't have access to health care, it makes it look like our entire civilization kind of needs to be seeing a therapist, that we've somehow become devoid of an appropriate level of empathy. These people are not easy to reason with, though. If you have empathy, then you apply empathetic thinking to every social setting. If you don't have it, it doesn't make much sense to you. Over the years, I've published a lot of articles about gun control. And I usually do that right on the heels of a mass shooting. And I'm well aware that mass shootings are the smallest percentage of problems with our gun violence in the United States. Most gun deaths are not a mass shooting, but mass shooting is when it gets into the public's thinking, and that's when you can get people to think about it. The most consistent responses that I've received over the last 25 years of publishing these articles is, why don't you ban automobiles? Automobiles kill more people than guns, which I think technically is no longer true, because we've made cars safer and safer and guns haven't had any real improvement. But on the face of it, to a reasonable person, it's a nonsense argument. Cars are used to get 200 million people to work, to school, to the marketplace, on vacation, to get medical care and entertainment every single day. Guns do not play that kind of role in our modern life. Outside of military or police use, or that occasionally rare person that actually hunts in order to eat, guns don't have a necessary function. But that doesn't make sense to a psychopath, because they have no empathy for the tens of thousands of people who die from gunshot wounds every year. The fact that tens of thousands of people die does not impress them. And arguing with them rarely produces anything other than name-calling and red faces, because it's darn near impossible to teach a psychopath to feel empathy. A mentally healthy gun owner will talk reasonably about the use of gun safes, about locking ammunition up separate from the guns. They can talk about reasonable restrictions on the size and capacity of the ammunition clip or magazine, the need for semi-automatic rifles, or whether certain rifles should be illegal. But a psychopath just digs in their heels, because when you say there are 32,000 gun deaths a year, and you point out that more Americans have been killed by toddlers with their mom's gun than have been killed by ISIS, they just stare at you, because they have no feeling for the victims of gun violence. They just know what they like and what they want. And I'm afraid that if the numbers went from 32,000 to 300,000 or 3 million, that it wouldn't make any difference, as long as they have what they want, because they cannot anticipate the feelings of victims and survivors. Again, a psychopath is not psychotic. A psychotic person really is crazy. But a psychopath can fake loving and empathetic relationships. But the people that are closest to them can usually tell that it's not real. They can go to college, they can be business owners, politicians, and in some cases that I don't really want to go too deep into today, they can even become the chairman of the board of a large denominational church located at 1515 South National Avenue. But I'm not going to digress any further. A psychotic is insane, but a psychopath can appear to be coldly sane and very organized to a fault. Sociopaths tend to be withdrawn. They avoid a lot of social interaction. They will tell you they don't need people. They don't want people in their life. I don't have friends, don't want friends. A psychopath, on the other hand, will be very social and want to be in charge of every room that they walk into. They may even want to see their name in large letters on the side of buildings that they build and don't pay the builders for building them. I may not be being very subtle anymore, but let me give you a clear example from Monday night's presidential debate. When the suggestion was made that Trump might not be paying any federal income taxes at all, his immediate reply was, "That means I'm smart." Now, I heard on one of the Sunday morning shows this morning that he denied saying that, even though we all watched it. And he said, "I didn't say that. You say I said that. I don't know that I said that." I know that he said that. I heard him say it. Sociopaths and psychopaths walk among us, and they think they are the smart ones. They think that they are in charge. They take the empathetic values and principles of spiritual people as a sign of weakness, that it's easy to exploit us because we have these empathetic feelings. They literally think that it would be ignorant not to take advantage of people who make themselves vulnerable. Trump's sons are big game hunters, and some of us look at that and say, why on earth would anybody want to kill a lion or an elephant, these beautiful, majestic creatures? But they would look at you dumbfounded. If they were willing to speak at all, they would say, well, it was unarmed. I mean, why not? I mean, they literally wouldn't understand why not shoot it. The one thing that I have to safeguard from the surgical use of logic in my profession as a religious professional is that on some baseline, I'm asking you to do something that's not logical, and that is to choose to be more empathetic. Now, doing that makes the world better for all of us, but even when it doesn't make it better for you, I'm still asking you to choose empathy. We spent the entire 8 years of the history of our church cooking food and serving people who don't attend church here, who are never going to contribute to us, who will not become either our employees or our employers. They're not going to be members of our family or even close friends. We've done it as an exercise in compassion. You learn to ride a bicycle by riding a bicycle. You learn to sing by singing. You learn to practice empathy. You learn to be empathetic by practicing, by doing it. Feeling empathy changes the way that you see the world. It literally changes the pathways in your brain so that you can receive pleasure from being empathetic the more you practice it. It changes the way you think. Those who have hardened their hearts and minds against feeling can honestly feel like they are smarter and better than we bleeding heart liberals who sometimes feel so much that it drives us into despondency, depression, or cynicism. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "As long as there is poverty in the world, I can never be rich, even if I have $1 billion or claim to have 10 billion. As long as diseases are rampant and millions of people in this world cannot expect to live more than 28 or 30 years, then I can never be totally healthy, even if I've just had a clean checkup. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be." This is the way our world is made. No individual or nation can stand out boasting of being independent. We are all interdependent. Now, that was King's worldview, and I can say in many ways it is my worldview, but to be completely honest, it is not a necessary worldview. I understand those who take a much more selfish worldview, because that can also be defended as logical. Philosophically speaking, progressive faith rests on a single but very profound choice, and it's a choice that isn't based in evidence or critical thinking or logic or reason. It is an a priori choice, that is, a choice before the fact. And the choice is this: do I live for my own pleasure, or will I use my life to make the world better for others? That's the choice. Even those who claim the second half of that equation often appear to live entirely by the former. If there is a reason at all to have a church in the future, it has to be to foster our connection to one another in love and in compassion and in empathy. Otherwise, I think we're just kidding ourselves.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.